When we think about starting a new entrepreneurial journalism project, or really any product or service, there are three core elements that we should focus on. The first is the product or service itself. What are we actually making? What problem is it solving? Who is it for? What does it look like? How does it feel? The second key thing we want to think about is the community that we're serving. Who is this product or service for? What are their needs? What are their concerns? What are the gaps in terms of what's offered to them or what's available to them? And how are we going to reach them? How will we serve a community that we want to target or to reach with whatever product or service we have? Finally, the third component is how will we actually make money on this? What's the revenue look like? How do we manage the process of creating something that has value and then returning some of the value to the creator itself, so to the person who's creating it or the team that's creating it. So how will we earn money and how will we make the business side of this product or service work? Those are the three key elements to any entrepreneurial or journalism product. And when we think about whether we're on track for a product or service that we're developing, we want to think about these key four questions. The first is desirability. Do people actually need this? Do they want it? Is it solving an actual problem for people? Is it addressing something that they actually have an expressed need for, or that there's an evident gap in the marketplace for? Is it desirable in some way? A second key question that we have to solve along the way, and we may not know the answers right from the start. These are questions that we solve through through our research and through our experimentation. The second key thing that we're thinking a lot about is feasibility. Can we actually do this? Do we have the technical means to do this? Do we have ways of getting this done? The third is viability. Is this actually something that could lead to a viable business model? Is there potential revenue here, and are the costs ones that we can potentially manage? Is this potentially, assuming that things fall into place and it's desirable and that we can actually create it, is there potential that we could make this into a business that actually works? And then finally, is it compatible with our values and what we aim to do with our lives? Is it ethical? Does it align with our values? And is it something that makes sense with the rest of our lives? In some cases, it might require you to move somewhere else across the world, and maybe that's not compatible with the other aspects of your life. Or maybe it requires you to take some shortcuts in how you deal with people, and maybe that's not compatible with your own ethical values or your principles. So in each of these four cases, we assess whether something is desirable, whether it's feasible, whether it's viable, and whether it's compatible, in order to make sure that people actually want something, that we can actually do it, that there's actually a business model there, and that it actually meets the standards of our own values and ethics. Those are an important set of four key issues that we need to address whenever we're developing a new idea. And it's a kind of checklist that we can make sure we're touching base on as we develop any new venture. When we think about developing a new venture, I like to think of that process as having these 7 core steps to it. It helps me to take what might be an amorphous, complicated, scary kind of process and break it down into something that's more manageable and more feasible, really, because you can really think about one thing at a time and manage something in smaller chunks. The first part of this process is learning. It's really getting to know a community, getting to understand the topic that you're interested in addressing. If you're interested in serving a particular community, it's important to know who's in that community and what their lives are like and what their needs are like. If you're interested in exploring the potential that new technologies like Amazon Alexa and Google Home have, you have to learn a little bit about how that platform works, what's already on that platform, what are the strengths of that platform, what are its weaknesses and limitations. So the first step is really learning and understanding how something works, whether it's the solution that you're exploring or whether it's the community that you're potentially serving, or maybe a problem that you've identified. And in the case of a problem, it means breaking that problem down into its component parts. So if you've identified that there's no quality news source covering a particular aspect of business in Arabic, for example, you might then explore why that is and what are the offerings that are available in Arabic and what are the platforms that they use and why hasn't this particular topic been addressed, or maybe it's been addressed but not adequately, and why is that? And that's all part of the learning process that is really at the core of the first part of the entrepreneurial journalism exploration voyage. The second key thing is launching. And your reaction to that might be, wait a second, how can you launch right at the beginning of this process or early in this process? And that's what's really exciting about the process of entrepreneurial journalism, is that you can launch before you've figured out all the answers. And in fact, you launch in order to figure out many of the answers, because only by connecting with the real world and real people can you learn what the product actually has to have and shouldn't have, and what characteristics it needs, and what people like most about it, or what people are missing from the early version that you start with. So early in the process, we launch, and we launch with what we often call a minimum viable product, which essentially means the simplest version of the product that we can come up with that serves one of the basic needs that we've identified. So we really consider it an experiment. It's something that we try in order to learn from people that we're serving. Once we have something out there, we continue to refine it. We continue to improve upon it based on people's interactions with it. And we focus on growing from one person who's trying it out to 5 people, and then 10 people, and so on, until we've reached a sizable, small community that we can learn from and serve as a kind of test bed, a test ground for that early stage product. Once we've accomplished that and reached a small community of people, we focus on developing a potential revenue stream. We think about testing what people might be willing to pay for, and it may not be the consumers directly paying for it. It might be a third party, like a sponsor or a supporter of some other kind, who's paying for that, an advertiser, etc. And it might not be through the content or service itself directly. So if we have a news publication, we may actually end up generating money through events that we host, or through secondary services that we provide to local businesses, or to other interested entities that can benefit from the strengths and skills and capacities that we have. So that fourth phase is about beginning to test the waters on earning revenue and how this might actually make money for us. Then we really focus on the team, and some of these things happen at the same time. This isn't a fully linear process. It's a circular process. You're continuing to improve and learn even as you grow, even as you begin to run your team. And running your team and identifying the right people to work with and identifying the right partners is a crucial part of this, because in almost no case can one person do everything herself or himself. In almost every instance of an entrepreneurial journalism venture, we have to work with other people, either as partners or as supporters, people who play various roles in creating the product, distributing the product, helping us generate revenue on the product. The next core phase is shifting. It's pivoting. It's identifying what you've done early on that's worked, measuring what's not working and what's working, and pivoting and making adjustments so that you improve the product or service and make the second and third iteration even better than the first. That's a crucial part of the process. Almost nothing is birthed perfectly. Everything requires modification. Everything requires iteration and adjustment in order to ultimately succeed. If you think about virtually any product or service you use today, and you might take the social platforms as an example because many of us are familiar with those, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat, they're changing virtually constantly. Twitter just updated its design for the I don't know how manyth time. Facebook has gone through so many different iterations that it's hard for us to even remember what it initially looked like. Snapchat similarly iterates and changes its design every couple of months. And it's because they measure how people are responding to the product, they develop new capabilities, they consider new ways of presenting information, sharing information, distributing information, and they make those adjustments to make the product even stronger, more sticky, more valuable. And finally, we think at some point about the end of the road for whatever product or service that we might be developing. And that might mean exiting by selling this product or service. It might mean exiting by doing an IPO if we're one of those rare few. It might mean moving on to our next product or service if the product or service we started turns out not to be as successful as we hope it might be. One of the amazing things and fantastic things about entrepreneurial journalism is that it's really a win-win proposition, because even if your product fails or service fails, which we should keep in mind the majority of any entrepreneurial venture, the majority of those ventures do fail, And even if that happens, though, in this world we live in, there's great value placed on having an entrepreneurial spirit, having an innovative capability. And so even if a product or service that you create, a new newsletter you start, or a new website that you launch, or a new podcast that you create, if any of that happens not to meet its initial objectives, or your dreams aren't fulfilled with that, you're in a great position to then create something new, or to go and work with other people who are creating something new, or to make an existing product or service even better. It's interesting to note that one of the characteristics that successful entrepreneurs tend to have most in common isn't any particular personality trait, it's not any particular geographic origin, or where they went to school, or anything like that. It's actually having tried to start something once before. So that's a great predictor of people who are going to go on and create something new that's successful. And it requires, in many cases, multiple efforts before you're able to do something that's really impactful and resonates. So that's an important part of the process to be cognizant of even from the beginning, because it's important to know what the different potential eventual outcomes might be and to be prepared for those different outcomes, whatever may happen. So that, in a nutshell, is the 7-step process, the 7 phases of most entrepreneurial journalism ventures. These are the things that entrepreneurial journalists do along the way to build their ventures.